Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, getting in your car like you always do, driving down the same highway you've driven 100 times. And suddenly realizing the rules have completely changed overnight. No warning, no big announcement on the news, just a new reality and a potential fine or fee sitting right around the corner that you never saw coming. That's exactly what millions of Americans could be facing starting tomorrow. And what's making people nervous isn't just the change itself. It's how quietly it all happened, because most people still don't know. And that right there is a problem. So let's talk about what's going on. Across multiple states, new highway rules and toll regulations are either going into effect or expanding starting tomorrow. And these aren't small technical adjustments buried in some transportation report. These are real changes that could affect how much money comes out of your pocket every single time you get behind the wheel. We're talking about updated toll structures, stricter lane enforcement policies, new camera-based ticketing systems, and in some areas, the expansion of congestion pricing zones that essentially charge you just for driving through certain parts of a city or highway corridor during peak hours. And here's what stands out to me personally: a lot of these changes are being rolled out with very little mainstream attention. The people who will feel this the most? Everyday drivers, working families, seniors on fixed incomes who depend on their car to get to doctor appointments, grocery stores, and family visits. People who genuinely cannot afford a surprise bill showing up in the mail 2 weeks from now. Now, some people might hear new highway rules and think, okay, how bad can it really be? But here's the part that doesn't get discussed enough. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is happening at a moment when millions of Americans are already stretched incredibly thin. A lot of beneficiaries and working-class drivers are starting to wonder whether these new costs were even considered with them in mind. Because when you're already budgeting down to the last dollar, an unexpected toll charge, a camera-generated fine, or a new congestion fee isn't just an inconvenience. It could mean choosing between that and something else like medication, or groceries, or a utility bill. And that's what makes this conversation bigger than just a traffic update. But here's the part nobody is really talking about loudly enough right now. The enforcement side of these new rules may actually be the most significant piece of all this. Several states are dramatically expanding their automated camera ticketing systems on highways. We're talking about cameras that can track your speed, monitor lane usage, catch toll evasion, and in some cases flag vehicles in real time for a whole list of potential violations. And unlike a traffic stop where an officer uses some judgment, cameras don't negotiate. They just generate a notice, and that notice turns into a bill. And that bill can grow fast if it gets ignored or disputed incorrectly. Some people are starting to wonder whether this kind of automated enforcement is really about road safety or whether it's become a revenue strategy for states that are dealing with their own budget pressures. That's a conversation worth having, because the data on camera-based ticketing systems has been pretty revealing in cities that adopted them early. In many cases, the fines hit lower-income zip codes at a disproportionate rate, not because those drivers are worse drivers, but because of where those highways are located and who commutes on them. Honestly, this is where things get really interesting and a little uncomfortable. A lot of drivers who've already heard about these changes are expressing real frustration online. The common theme? They feel like the system keeps finding new ways to take money from people who are already struggling. There's growing speculation that some of these toll expansions are directly tied to infrastructure funding gaps, meaning states are essentially passing the cost of road maintenance directly to drivers through increased fees rather than finding it through other budget mechanisms. Some believe this is a reasonable trade-off. Others think it's deeply unfair, especially for people in rural areas who have no public transit alternative and simply must drive to survive. And then there's another group of people raising a different concern altogether. They're asking, what about the people who don't even know this is happening? Because not everyone is plugged in. Not everyone is watching the news or reading transportation authority announcements. A lot of seniors, a lot of rural families, a lot of everyday commuters are going to find out about these changes the hard way, through a ticket, through a surprise toll charge, through a fine that shows up weeks later with late fees already attached. That scenario? It's not hypothetical. It's already happened in states that rolled out similar systems in recent years, and the complaints that followed were significant. What happens next may surprise a lot of people, because the conversation around these highway changes is starting to connect to a much bigger national debate about cost of living, government fees, and who actually bears the financial burden of maintaining America's infrastructure. There's a growing feeling among many Americans, particularly older Americans and those on fixed incomes, that they are consistently the ones absorbing new costs while having the least ability to fight back against them. And this highway rule situation is being seen by some as just the latest example of that pattern. Personally, I think the frustration is completely understandable. when you've spent your whole life paying into systems and following the rules, being hit with new fees and fines through automated systems that give you no real recourse. That stings in a way that goes beyond just the dollar amount. It's about respect. It's about being seen. And this could become a much bigger political issue as we get deeper into 2025 and head toward another election cycle. Because when everyday financial pain reaches a certain level, people stop just complaining about it online, they start demanding answers from their representatives. And right now, that pressure is quietly building. Now here's something important, because this channel is always about giving you real, actionable information, not just emotional content with nowhere to go. If you drive regularly, tomorrow is genuinely the right time to get informed about what's changing in your specific state. Check your state's Department of Transportation website. Look up whether your area is expanding toll zones or implementing new camera enforcement. If you use a toll pass like EasePass or a state-specific transponder, check whether your account is current and properly linked, because the gap between having a transponder and having it correctly registered is exactly where a lot of surprise bills come from. Some people are starting to realize that simply having the device isn't always enough. If your account has an old credit card attached, or if your balance has lapsed, you could still be flagged for toll evasion even if you've been driving through those lanes for years without issue. And for seniors or anyone on a fixed income sum, states actually do have hardship exemption programs or reduced toll options for qualifying residents. These programs are chronically underutilized because they're not well advertised, worth looking into before you just assume the full cost applies to you. But let's zoom out for a second, because what's happening on America's highways tomorrow isn't just a transportation story. It's part of a much larger pattern that's worth paying attention to. States are facing real fiscal pressure. Federal infrastructure money only goes so far, and the easiest political path to covering those gaps is fees and fines, because unlike raising income taxes or property taxes, road fees tend to fly under the radar. They don't require a big legislative vote. They don't generate the same political blowback. They just quietly become part of the cost of daily life. And that's a dynamic that many people believe is deeply unfair, particularly when it consistently falls heaviest on the people who can least afford it. Not the wealthy commuter who barely notices a $20 toll, but the senior making a fixed monthly income, the delivery driver whose entire livelihood depends on covering as many miles as possible with as little overhead as possible, the single parent driving an older car to a job across town with no other option. There's growing speculation that unless drivers and voters push back loudly, this kind of fee creep will only continue, that what starts as a small adjustment to highway rules today becomes the foundation for something much larger tomorrow. So here's where we land. Tomorrow, something real is changing on American highways, and whether you personally feel the impact right away or not, the direction this is heading matters, for your wallet, for your daily routine, for the millions of people in this country who are already counting every dollar and simply cannot absorb another unexpected expense without feeling it somewhere else in their life. The real question now is whether the people making these decisions are actually thinking about those Americans, or whether everyday drivers are once again being asked to quietly carry a burden that nobody bothered to warn them about. Because if history is any guide, the warning usually comes after the bill does. Make sure you're prepared. Share this with someone who drives, and drop a comment below. Have you noticed new toll changes or highway fees in your area? I want to hear what's happening where you are, because this story is bigger than any one state, and it's only just getting started.